Honda sedans are leaders in their respective classes, not just on sales, but also in technology, driving dynamics, and pricing. But say you've already decided you want a Honda sedan, you still have two excellent options, the Honda Civic and Honda Accord. While they're obviously not in the same class or even the same size, the Civic is definitely good enough to make you think, is it really worth the extra money to upgrade to Accord? So to answer that question, we're going to compare them point by point to find out once and for all if the Accord is truly superior. For this comparison, we chose both models to be equipped in the highest value trim, called Sport. This trim gives some of the high-end styling and equipment from the top of the lineups, but brings it down to a lower price point for the mainstream crowd. Starting with the Civic, Sport is a new trim for 2019, positioned between the LX and the EX. It starts out at $21,950. And since Hondas never have any options, all we have to add in is the $895 destination charge. With that factored in, the total is a very reasonable $22,845. Moving to Accord, of course it does carry a higher starting price. In this case, an equivalent sport trim will start at $26,180. Destination for the Accord is also $895. So its total rings in at just a touch over $27,000. That puts our price difference between the Civic Sport and Accord Sport at $4,230, which is a pretty significant amount of money for the average consumer. Therefore, to represent this, the Civic will receive 1 point per $1,000 of price difference, or 4 points to start. So with all that said, let's go ahead and see if the Accord offers enough to overcome the price difference. Starting out under the hoods, indeed the Accord already offers an advantage. While the Civic Sport comes with a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine, the Accord has Honda's newer and more powerful 1.5-liter turbo 4-cylinder. This produces a pretty large power difference between them, at 158 horsepower versus 192 horsepower, and 138 pound-feet of torque versus 192 pound-feet of torque. However, for the transmissions, they both have CVTs putting power to the front wheels only. Now, as far as driving dynamics, both are very pleasant to drive and near the top of their respective classes. As you would expect, power is definitely better in the Accord, and it also delivers it in a much quieter manner. Both of their CVTs are tuned very well, so you won't feel any of that rubber band feel or hear any of that annoying drone that's common for a lot of the rivals. But what I'm most impressed about of all the things is the extremely buttoned down and agile feel of both of these two chassis. They certainly represent the sportier side of the class, but without sacrificing ride quality. The only other notable difference between the two is the quieter cabin in the Accord, so overall the Accord does have the more refined driving dynamics. Finally, the Civic does come out on top for fuel economy, at 32 combined versus 31 combined, but that is below a 5% difference, so it won't receive a point. Anyways, now that we have that stuff out of the way, let's move on to the updated exteriors and features. The first thing I like to start out with is the overall styling, which is a lot more different than you would think for two siblings. Beginning with the Civic, its grille has been refreshed for 2019 to be completely black no matter what exterior color. This gives it a really mean look, especially when paired with a black exterior. The grille on the Accord is distinctly different, with a really large opening that goes all the way to the bottom. It uses a darkened chrome for the Sport instead of full black, so it does look a little less sporty than the Civic. That said, however, the headlights on the Accord are definitely more premium since they are LED instead of regular halogens on the Civic. And the same also goes for the fog lights. As far as the rest of the styling is concerned, both look pretty athletic for their classes. But some elements of the Accord seem kind of forced, like the taillights that don't blend into the body as well as they do on the Civic. Overall, the Civic just has a more cohesive design. Now we'll start working our way around the cars and check out all the features. Starting up front, both models actually give you the larger wheels straight from the highest trim, 18 inches on the Civic and 19 inches on the Accord. And then for the mirrors, neither model has heating or any kind of blind spot monitoring, since that would require at least the EX. However, that said, both models do come standard with pretty much every other kind of safety system available. Included within the standard Honda Sensing Suite are emergency pre-collision braking, lane keeping assist, automatic high beam headlights, and adaptive cruise control. Those are very impressive systems to have standard on vehicles that are in the $20,000 range. And then to finish things off on the outside, we have the fuel ranges. Accord has a 14.8 gallon tank, while Civic has a couple gallons less at 12.4 gallons. That does mean that the Accord wins here for fuel range, since its fuel economy is very similar to the Civic. The actual numbers are 459 miles for the Accord and 397 miles for the Civic. Well, that wraps up everything on the outside. So now let's go ahead and move on to the interiors and see how they stack up. Now, just getting into the interiors, there are already important differences. Somewhat surprisingly, the cheaper Civic actually has both smart entry and remote start, which are missing from the Accord. But once inside, things get more similar, since you'll notice that both sport trims are only available with black interiors, and the seats are mostly cloth but trimmed in leatherette on the outside edges. However, the adjustability is very different, with the Accord having 12-way power seats versus only 6-way manual seats on the Civic. And it is worth noting that they both have the same front legroom measurement. Once inside, I have to say both look quite nice considering their modest price tags. Interestingly, the materials are pretty much the same in both, with soft touch plastic across all the upper areas, and then some faux carbon fiber trim or black trim through the middle part. The lower areas are hard touch, but they fit together in a way that doesn't feel cheap at all. The tiebreaker here though is the door trim, where the Accord has more leather and soft touch materials to rest your arm on. For both, press the button to start. When you do, an 8-inch display will fire up on the Accord and a 7-inch one on the Civic. And then coming back to the gauges, while their designs look very different, they are both premium digital setups with a lot of different functions. They both also have leather-wrapped steering wheels with manual adjustability and paddle shifters on the back side. Now moving on to the important subject of storage. You'd think that the Accord would easily defeat the Civic, but you'd be wrong. Both have absolutely massive center consoles for sedans. However, the Civic does have to use this area partially for cup holders, while the Accord has dedicated ones. However, up in the front, the Civic has not one, but 2 large storage bins, which exceeds that of the Accord. Overall, I'd have to call this area a draw. Checking out your shifters here, they are both traditional ones that are easy to use. When you go into reverse, you will find multi-view backup cameras with active trajectory. However, the Accord does have a noticeably better resolution quality. Moving on up to the climate, they both actually have automatic climate setups even on these lower end trims. However, you will find on the Civic it's single zone, and on the Accord it's dual zone. Plus the Accord has much more intuitive controls. Neither of these models will have heated seats on these trims. Now coming back here to the screens, as you can tell, besides for the different sizes, they also have different software. The Civic is still running the old Honda Link system, which definitely feels a lot less responsive and intuitive. Plus the graphics in general lack the classy look of the Accord. It is worth noting though that no matter what, both models do support Apple CarPlay and Android Auto if you prefer those systems. And then wrapping up the cabins, neither model offers a moonroof until you get to the EX trim. But overall, both are fantastic places to spend time, and they have features which far outstrip their modest price tags. Now moving into the back, just like a lot of areas, both Civic and Accord have some of the most spacious back seats in their respective classes. Obviously, the Accord does have more space at 40.4 inches of legroom and 37.3 inches of headroom. But the Civic isn't too far behind at 37.4 inches of legroom and 37.1 inches of headroom. Once we get into the back seats, there aren't a great deal of amenities in either, but the Accord does have a storage area where vents would be on the upper trims, and it also has a center armrest that the Civic is lacking. The other important space in the rear is the trunk, where the two look very similar. The Accord does have a little bit of extra width, which allows it to outdo the Civic at 16.4 cubic feet of space versus 15.1 cubic feet of space. In both cars, you will find that the rear seats can fold 60-40 split. So there you have it. The Accord slightly edges out the Civic despite the price disadvantage. But I'm sure as you can tell by now, the Civic is neck and neck with the Accord in most respects. If you are thinking about either of these two excellent products, then we highly recommend checking out the other one as well in person. Anyways, thanks for joining us on another Car Confections face-off comparison. And be sure to subscribe for more comparisons and our signature full review videos. Take care.
Mm-hmm.